I have to tell someone. People need to know the truth. The truth about who or what is out there. I can tell you for a fact that while most people laugh it off as a joke or just a silly myth, Bigfoot is real. And there's a damn good reason they don't want people knowing about it. I have to tell someone. My brother-in-law is a sheriff here in the town we live in, and on occasion I volunteer to help them out in situations where extra manpower is needed. Our town is just a speck on the map, and not much happens around here that calls for such attention, but every now and then something happens where our three-man department needs a little assistance. The whole town is more like family than they are neighbors. That's why when a boy went missing, the entire town wanted to help go look for him, including me. It was summertime, and that particular year was exceptionally hot, busting 100 degrees every day for a week or more straight. 3 of the teenage boys here in town decided to go for a hike to the popular swimming hole, Spencer Creek. An old railroad ran through the woods down at the east end of town, and off in those woods the old train bridge crossed Spencer Creek. Some of the braver kids liked to go out there and jump off the old bridge, even though their parents would warn them of the dangers. But you know how teenagers are. The 3 boys had followed a trail that was barely even there off into the woods, until they hit the railroad tracks. Then they had followed the tracks back to the bridge. The jump from the bridge is about 15 feet down to the water, and while that may not seem like much, when you're standing there looking down, it seems a lot higher. Most kids were content just swimming off the side of the main road where it crosses the creek, but like I said, some of the braver ones would take the hike out to the bridge, mostly for bragging rights. According to the 2 boys that made it back, everything had gone fine out at the bridge. The sun was starting to set, so they got back on the tracks and headed home. They said they had problems finding the trail they had followed in, but had found a different one further down that headed back into the woods towards the direction they needed to go. So they just followed it instead. The boys were all in swimming trunks and t-shirts with nothing but flip-flops on their feet, so the trip back was no easy going. They said the trail they followed had split and that the one boy, Jacob, had argued about which way to go and had headed off on his own. The other 2 boys eventually came out of the woods about a mile farther out than where they had originally gone in on the main road. They walked back towards town, but stopped once they got to where the road crossed the creek and waited for Jacob. They said they yelled his name a few times and waited until it was dark, but finally decided that he must have come out of the woods before them and walked back into town on his own. Jacob never made it out of those woods. Once news had spread that the boy was missing, we formed up into groups and started walking the woods. A couple guys with some tracking dogs took the trail the boys had walked out on, but when they got to the split they said Jacob had taken, those dogs shut down completely. Just hugged up against their owners, tails tucked and whimpering. They wouldn't even try to catch a scent. The first day produced no results. Some of us stayed out all night, but couldn't find sign of the boy anywhere. Day 2 of the search produced some hope in the form of a dark blue flip-flop. Jacob's parents identified it as one belonging to the boy. There was no other sign of him, not even the second shoe, and something about it just didn't make sense. The shoe wasn't found on any trail. It was off in the woods, just sitting on top of an old log. No signs of the boy, no signs of any animals, just the dark blue flip-flop on a log in the middle of the woods. Day 3 brought the rains, and the tracking dogs were called off. They had proven to be useless anyway, and now that the rain had washed away any good scent trails, there was no need for them. Some guys in boats worked the creek, fearing that the boy may have ended up back in the water somehow, but they didn't find anything either. By the 4th day, the search area had expanded to the other side of the tracks and the opposite bank of the creek. We thought maybe he got lost and backtracked to the railroad tracks and tried following those back into town. Hope sprang up again when we found his t-shirt wadded up at the base of a tree just off the tracks on the opposite side of the bridge. It had been ripped and torn pretty badly to the point it was no longer a shirt, but at least it was a sign that the boy had been there. Near the shirt was what looked like sort of a game trail. The ground was packed down pretty good, and we thought that Jacob might have tried it as a way out of the woods. 4 of us took the trail and followed it off into the woods. It didn't take long before something just didn't feel right. We were on a trail, but there was no deer tracks or any other kind of animal sign on this trail. Every now and then we'd come to a small tree that would be snapped and twisted, with the top of it laying across the trail, almost like something was trying to block anyone from using it. This path we were following was no easy going. It winded its way through thorn thickets and turned back on itself several times. We were getting torn up just trying to follow it. I can't imagine how a boy with barely any clothes on would have traversed it, but it was the only option we had, so we kept going. Eventually, this trail came to an old dried-up creek bed. It must have been an older branch of Spencer Creek that had dried up years ago. We climbed down into it, about an 8-foot drop to the bottom. Something caught my eye down the creek bed about 20 yards or so. The other blue flip-flop. We radioed back to my brother-in-law that we had found the other shoe and gave them our location. We continued heading in the direction that we had found the shoe, following the creek bed, and trying to stay optimistic that we would find the boy still alive. Maybe he had just gotten turned around and injured himself. We had to remain positive, even though in the back of my mind I knew something was horribly wrong with all of this. As we started to get deeper into the woods, the creek bed we were following started to change. What was once a clear path was now riddled with large piles of brush and old logs. The old creek bed transformed into more of a winding tunnel, so much that in some areas the sunlight was blocked out completely. We didn't know what was going on, but this didn't seem natural to any of us. The creek bed took a sharp turn back towards the left and emptied out into a larger cleared out area on the bank of Spencer Creek. What was once an old rocky creek bed gave way to soft dirt and mud. All over were huge, human-looking footprints. We're talking massive, way bigger than my size 12, closer to maybe 16 inches long, some of them. They were all over this creek bank. My boot print barely left an impression, but these tracks sunk down into the earth at least a good inch or more. Any other time, I would have thought it was a joke, but after looking around at the others with me, I could tell we all knew this was no joke at all. That's when I saw something I wish I could erase from my memory. Back over by the tree line, about 15 feet from where we had spilled out at, was a big old willow tree growing up on the bank of the creek with a large cavity underneath it. There, shoved and folded up underneath the root ball of that big willow tree, was the body of young Jacob. His body looked like something had just taken it and rolled it up like a ball and crammed him in there. We walked over to the body to confirm it and radioed my brother-in-law. He said he was entering the trail where we had found the t-shirt earlier and would be there soon. I felt horrible for the boy's parents. How would this even be explained to them? I was right there and was having a hard time understanding what was going on, what had happened. What had that poor boy gone through? How do you explain to a boy's mother that her son was killed by something that isn't supposed to exist? We decided that 2 of us would stay with the body and the other 2 would go back to where the path had hit the creek bed to meet up with the group that was coming in. No sooner had we decided which ones would go and which ones would stay when we saw we weren't alone. There it was, just in the shadows of the mouth where the creek bed spilled out onto the bank we were standing on. It was just crouched there, just watching us. We didn't even have a clue it was there until we looked directly at it. You could see its big old shoulders and arms with its fists planted down on the ground holding its massive frame. It looked mad. We had found the boy. We knew it was out there and we knew what it had done, and it didn't like it. It was the color of dark soil, almost black, and seemed to blend in perfectly with those old logs in the shadows. It was hard to see any details as it never came out into the light, but you could see that it was covered with hair, and the hair was longer as it draped down over the shoulders, and it had a long tangled beard. The eyes were easily the most